attempting to do a little Manzanita puree, but the seeds are hard as rocks and must be separated from each fruit, but I'm going to see if I can figure out an easier way than peeling one at a time. So the first interesting thing I noticed is when I added water to my big pan, look how the more ripe ones separated from the less ripe ones. So yeah, those less ripe ones are sink to the bottom and the more ripe ones come up to the top. So that may be one way of manually separating the different ripenesses. So next it's just going to be an issue of, I think what I'm going to try to do is process them by hand, getting all of the seeds out, and also probably smashing them and seeing if the seeds naturally separate in water. That should be what happens, is that all of the fresh flesh of the fruit will kind of float to the top and all the seeds will sink down to the bottom. So, and then what I can do is scrape off the top with the ripe flesh, none of the seeds, and then process that to make a puree and then eventually a fruit leather. Cool so far. Okay, so after a very long process of separating out all the unripe manzanita and seeds, and so it really was kind of a lot in there. Some more over here. I did a sifting with this. You really get left with kind of a liquidy puree. There's a lot of solid down there, but you really want to make sure there's no seeds, and so I'm just going to be going through and checking to make sure there's no seeds. And yeah, I wanted to try to get as much of the flesh into the liquid as I could, but you see what happens, the seeds and the flesh really kind of stick together, so I think there's still enough in there to get enough flavor. So I'm still going to work on how to separate out the seeds even better next time, but I think this is a good place to start. So I'm going to reduce this, add some sweetener. Basically, this is going to be more like a jelly than a jam because it doesn't have those extra fibers. So, yeah, see how it goes here. Okay, so I just tried some of the liquid puree. Good, nice flavor, tastes just like the fruit. And I realize why most people are making a jelly and not a jam from this. It's very gritty. So when it's in your mouth, you get that grit taste in your mouth from all of the fiber that's really kind of suspended in the water. So I guess I could strain it again and get the grit out. The point in trying to save all the skin and flesh tissue was for the flavor and for more density. But yeah, good experiment. I think I probably will just leave it in. The grit doesn't bother me, but if anyone were gonna make this in any kind of larger quantity or commercial quantity, strain out the grit. I get it now. As a naturopath, I'm always trying to preserve the fruit every way I can, but in this case, may not be that palatable. So anyway, I'm gonna add some coconut sugar, let it reduce down and let it cool, and I'll have a somewhat gritty but flavorful manzanita jelly. All right, well, I know it doesn't look great, but the flavor, if I could describe it, by the way, it still needs to boil down a bit, still too much water in there, but trying it, the flavor is like nothing else. But I would compare it to a pear or a blueberry or maybe another berry. So nice, so lovely, this flavor here, even though it looks like brown mud. Delicious. So keep going. Okay, so in conclusion, I kept reducing down the manzanita I guess you would call it the syrup at this point. It kept reducing and reducing, and man, it never got much thicker. This is pretty cold and it just stayed thin. So, and it's so sweet, I don't want to reduce it anymore, but I think the best way to use this is probably putting it in your tea. So I just made like a nice little linden flower tea, and I'm going to use this as a syrup instead of any other kind of sweetener. It's super sweet, so good. Linden flower is also a nice floral tea. So I thought it was gonna be fruit leather. I usually make fruit leathers. I've made fruit leather of lots of different kinds of fruits, but there's just not enough fruit. It gets very gritty. I know people do make jelly, but I think for me this is probably gonna be the best way of using this. So yeah, ended up in the end making a Manzanita syrup for teas, and it's so good. It's local to my area here, so we know we want to always be eating and consuming all of the local flora and fauna of our local environment. But if you're in the Southwest or you just want to try this, man, really, really fun project. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed.